Dear colleagues, a very good afternoon from IRENA headquarters, Abu Dhabi. My name is Prasoon Agarwal, and I serve as the Regional Program Officer for Asia Pacific at IRENA. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to this virtual webinar on advancing the energy transition in Central Asia through nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies. And I'm most pleased to moderate this important meeting. Taking this opportunity, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our keynote speakers first, Mr. Francesco La Camera, Director General of IRENA, Mr. David Moran, COP26 Regional Ambassador for Europe, Central Asia, Turkey, and Iran, and Mr. James Scabert, Director for Mitigation Division at UNFCCC Secretariat. I would also like to greet all distinguished speakers and participants from government counterparts, financial institutions, development partners, private sector, and non-governmental organizations who have joined us today. We are really excited to see such a high interest from a broad set of stakeholders with almost 350 registered participants from all over the world. Dear colleagues, allow me to give you some logistical information regarding the meeting today. As you are aware, the event is conducted virtually. If you encounter any technical issues, please write your issues in the chat box, and someone from the organizing team from the backend will help you. In case I encounter any technical issues, my colleague Alexandra will take over as the moderator of this webinar. Please note that we have simultaneous interpretation in Russian and English, and the channel can be selected in your Zoom settings. For all panelists, we would request you to please unmute yourself and start your video while making an intervention. And likewise, please ensure to mute yourself when you're not speaking, just to avoid any background noise. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the IRENA website after the meeting. Today's meeting will shortly start with welcoming remarks from our distinguished keynote speakers, followed by an IRENA presentation on the agency's support to the countries of Central Asia on NDCs. After that, we will have two panel discussions. The first one on experiences, opportunities, and best practices for the enhancement and implementation of NDCs and LTS, moderated by NDC Partnership, and followed by another panel discussion on mobilizing renewable energy financing at scale and de-risking investments for energy transition, moderated by IRENA. We will conclude this virtual meeting with an address by the Deputy Director General of IRENA. We are hopeful that today's event, which brings together a rich set of high-level representatives and experts active on the energy transition and climate action fronts in Central Asia, will act as a platform for regional discussions on raising the ambition for national climate pledges, enhancing progress towards developing LTS, and exploring in particular the key role renewable energy financing will play in Central Asia's energy transition. Without any further delay, to begin today's program, it is my pleasure to invite the Director General of IRENA, Mr. Francesco La Camera, who will be delivering his welcoming remarks through a video message.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the virtual dialogue on advancing the energy transition in Central Asia through national determined contribution and long-term strategies. First of all, I would like to thank our co-organizer, the UK COP26 presidency, for the collaborative efforts in having this important virtual event. In the run to the UNFCCC COP26 scheduled for the end of this year, IRENA has been working closely with the incoming UK presidency to facilitate a series of dialogues with national counterparts and development partners in different regions around the world. IRENA's mandate is to support our members in their effort to accelerate the energy transition. Our recently released first ever World Energy Transition Outlook embraces transition toward an energy sector based on renewable energy technology, signify a long-term solution for a more diverse economy that is also resilient, just, and inclusive. It is rooted in the sense of urgency to act on climate change. The outlook prioritizes a path that is most likely to rapidly reduce emissions in the coming decade and set the trajectory for development of the most promising technologies. The significance of the choice we make in the coming year is clear, and we must make the right ones. because there is no longer room for error. In this respect, NDCs can serve as the backbone to link our short-term responses to our medium and long-term goals. Working with several partners, including UNFCCC, UK COP26 presidency, UNDP and NDC partnership, we are already engaged in nearly 70 countries across the world and assisting them on the enhancement and implementation of their NDCs. Collectively, these countries represent total emission of over 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. The focus of our discussion today is Central Asia, a region that can utilize the potential of its renewable energy resources to address the climate challenges as well as the emerging energy sector challenges, particularly rising electricity demand, aging power infrastructure, and limited energy access for remote and nomadic population. Renewable energy deployment can also broaden macroeconomic impact, most notably socio-economic benefits, such as creating employment, developing local enterprise, and manufacturing capacity, avoiding health and environmental costs. All Central Asia countries have prepared and submitted emissions reduction targets under the NDCs. ARENA has been actively engaging and supporting countries in the region by providing them with tools and knowledge that help them enhance their NDCs through increased renewable energy commitment, while also helping them throughout the implementation stage. We are currently providing support to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan in different areas such as data and statistics, target setting, long-term planning, setting up monitoring, among others. We are pleased to see the strong commitment among countries in the region on taking this opportunity to review the NDC while raising ambition and expanding the role of renewable energy. Ladies and gentlemen, today's discussion aims to foster ambitious climate action by Central Asia governments and facilitate sharing of regional experience, lessons learned, and best practice, as well as understanding the role of energy sector transformation for climate action. It will touch upon the key role of mobilizing financing at scale and de-risking investment to accelerate energy transition and broadening the knowledge and understanding of the role of NDC in achieving the long-term objective of energy transition. I would therefore invite all the speakers and panelists to actively engage in the dialogue and wish you a very successful deliberation this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, DG, for those very inspiring words. It is always encouraging to have your constant support and guidance to deepen our cooperation with the Central Asia region. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador David Moran from the COP26 presidency for his opening remarks. Ambassador, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you. Good morning from me. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to join you today and want to thank ARENA for organizing such a timely discussion. And with the Glasgow Climate Summit less than 4 months away, your theme of advancing the region's energy transition through nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies is extremely timely. And as you know, the UK COP presidency's goal is an ambitious summit outcome supported by every country and across society, and which keeps the planet's temperature under control. And we're encouraging all countries, particularly major emitters, to come forward with ambitious NDCs, if possible before 30 July, in time for inclusion in the UN synthesis report, which they plan to publish before the pre-COP meeting in late September, and allowing an accurate reflection of global ambition and progress towards our shared Paris goals. And of course, it also enables your leadership and national plans to be showcased, particularly through supporting neighbors to follow suit, taking the first steps in implementation and putting net zero pledges into law. Because of course, ambition is the best basis for attracting the necessary money and support from international partners, whether public or private. NDCs should align with reaching net zero carbon by 2050, accompanied by long-term strategies which explain the pathway. They should be comprehensive across economies, transparent with good data and measurable targets, deliverable, of course, integrated into domestic policies, including for COVID recovery, and integrating gender perspectives, because as we all know, climate change is not gender neutral, and we encourage every country to nominate a gender focal point. To meet our net zero goals, the global transition to clean power needs to happen at least 4 times faster than at present. Countries will have to accelerate their phase out of coal, encourage engagement in renewable energy, limit deforestation, and speed up the switch to electric vehicles. Central Asia clearly has real potential for developing the renewable energy sector, and clean growth presents the most significant economic growth opportunity of the 21st century. And one estimate is that it could deliver global economic benefits worth $26 trillion to 2030. Now, with the huge fall in renewable energy generation costs in the past decade, solar photovoltaics and onshore wind are now the cheapest sources of new build generation for at least 2/3 of the world's population. And today's coal investments risk becoming stranded assets by 2030. Many already cost more to run than new renewable generation. Now, diversifying away from fossil fuels is not easy, as we all know, but it can be done. The UK's share of coal used for electricity fell from 40% in 2012 to less than 2% now, and we plan for 0 by 2024. And there are rewards. We now have 400,000 low carbon jobs in the UK. And today you'll be discussing effective ways to mobilize renewables financing. The economic tide is already turning. Now, my COP26 regional ambassador role includes helping you to prepare. And we're working closely with partners on 4 goals. 1, we've been discussing reviewing carbon emission targets to make them as ambitious as possible, preferably net zero by 2050, with long-term strategy and delivery plans. And your first panel discussion is an excellent opportunity to share perspectives on how best to achieve this. 2nd, helping countries and vulnerable communities hit by climate change. Terribly important. 3rd, also equally critical, increasing climate finance to ensure that the necessary technical and financial support is available. We're putting a lot of effort into working with developed partners and multilateral institutions to do as much as possible. And then finally, engaging with business, civil society, and young people. Ladies and gentlemen, the planet's at a turning point, and your presence today shows your commitment to tackling climate change. National and international targets must translate into action, and quickly. And the UK will continue to re-examine our commitments as required by the Paris Agreement. We urge others to do the same. I wish you a productive discussion and effective collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the opening address and also for setting the right context for our discussions today. Also, it's good to hear that you acknowledge the dropping cost of renewable energy and associated benefits, a topic that is very close to IRENA. And you will see some of our analysis on this issue in the meeting today. I would now like to pass the floor to Mr. James Gabbard from UNFCCC for his opening address. Mr. Gabbard, over to you, please.
Dear Director General Camara, Ambassador Moran, dear ladies and gentlemen,
It's my pleasure to join you virtually to this event aimed at advancing the energy transition in Central Asia to nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies. I'm James Grabert, the director of the UNFCCC Mitigation Division. Let me express first my gratitude to our partners in organizing the event, the International Renewable Energy Agency and the UK COP26 presidency team. We are all part in one of the most significant developments of the 21st century, perhaps even one of the greatest projects in human history, a massive decarbonization of economies to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, if not sooner. This is what science tells us we need to achieve to preserve a livable climate and limit climate change related damages. If we don't do this, then in the long term, humanity as we know it is unlikely to survive. The objective of the UNFCCC is to prevent dangerous interference with the climate system. In pursuing this objective, the goals of the Paris Agreement is to reach a global balance of emissions and removals. This internationally agreed goal requires the global community move quickly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to enhance removals. To achieve this, governments must significantly and immediately boost their climate change ambition and be accountable for meeting their pledges. But that's not the path we're currently on, and we're far from it. The recently published interim NDC synthesis report that covered 75 new or updated NDCs submitted through December last year and representing about 30% of the global greenhouse emissions showed that while the majority of nations increased their individual levels of ambition to reduce emissions, their combined impact was only putting us on a path to achieve less than 1% of the reduction required by 2030. This is clearly insufficient. As science tells us, we must slash emissions as soon as possible and be at 45% lower from 2010 by 2030 and be globally net zero by 2050. There is no separate path. There's no alternative universe. There's no other plan. This is simply what we must do. Addressing energy is at the heart of this deep and lasting transformation we must make to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Today, 75% of global emissions are caused by our need for energy. This includes electricity, heat, transportation, and much more. This energy system, supported by fossil fuels, has allowed humanity to make incredible advances in areas related to production, employment, industrialization, and much more. Yet it's equally clear we can no longer afford the side effects through increased pollution, decreased health, and ongoing climate change, especially when we know an alternative and technology feasible path exists. It won't be easy, this transition, but it's one that is absolutely necessary. Discussing what needs to be done would take hours, so let me focus on a few key outcomes that are needed. The extraction and transformation of fossil fuels into electricity, transportation, and heating fuel products needs to be rapidly eliminated. By 2050, electricity needs to be zero emission. This needs to be achieved earlier in some countries if the goal of Article 4 of the Paris Agreement is to be reached. What can be electrified needs to be electrified, particularly transport and those actions that continue to rely on unsustainable use of biomass. Where liquid and gaseous fuels are still needed, for example, in long distance transport and in industry, we need to support the development and commercialization of technologies that are already well known to use our soon to be zero emission electricity to produce clean e-liquids and e-gases. Coherence between the nationally determined contributions and energy policy is critical to achieve these ambitious NDC targets. Without linking the NDCs with specific energy policy targets and actions, the NDCs will run the risk of becoming just a commitment exercise and not mainstreamed into energy policy. Well-prepared NDCs with clear pathways towards the energy transition will help send a clear message to business and investor communities about the direction of travel and will help channel the needed finance towards energy transition efforts. In addition to NDCs that provide the near-term goal that countries are committing to be accountable for achieving, this clear message to the business and investor community can also be sent on the long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategy. In many countries, the development of these strategies this year may have not happened in time to inform their NDC target. Looking ahead to the future, the NDC revision cycles, policymakers can steer climate policy planning processes and ensure the alignment of NDCs with long-term climate strategies and policies with an overall energy transition in them. But we must ensure that nobody is left behind in this transition. We cannot repeat the same old story we've seen many times in the past, with great transition and change resulting in people and nations falling by the wayside. That's why it's important that nations ensure that this transition from fossil fuels to renewables is a just transition, one that helps workers readjust the clean energy economy. You may ask, what does that mean? Well, it means governments establish the programs and policies that will help people make a transition to the new industries. Jobs related to renewable energy are growing exponentially. But if people don't have the skills to work in those areas, we'll have big problems. We want the age of renewable energy to improve the lives of workers, not end their livelihoods. Yet many developing countries remain in urgent need of support to implement climate action. Climate action must be enabled and facilitated through the provision of adequate support where needed. This is critical and must be urgently addressed. Without adequate resources and access to greener technologies, this deep transformation will not happen. That is why the fulfillment of the commitment to mobilize 100 billion per year from developed nations to developing, a commitment that is more than 10 years old and still unfulfilled, is crucial to a successful transition, so that these billions can be used to unlock and direct the trillions that will be spent on energy systems over the decades. So as you discussed today, I urge you to keep in mind that we must use the tools we have, the NDCs, the long-term strategies, to provide the ambitious roadmaps we need to get to the world that we want. Я желаю вам подробной дискуссии сегодня. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grabert, for your opening remarks and for very clearly outlining the context for robust NDCs and LTS, as well as the global decarbonization efforts needed to further accelerate a just and inclusive transition. And I think the message from you is also very clear that the critical role financing will play in this transition, and something that we'll touch upon in our sessions today. Dear colleagues, active engagement and participation from UK COP26 presidency and UNFCCC at this meeting provides a very strong impetus to furthering the NDC and LTC discussions in Central Asia and building global momentum towards COP26. In this context, we are really thankful to both our keynote speakers. The next item on the agenda will be a scene-setting presentation to give an overview of IRENA's analysis of global energy transition trends, as well as our ongoing and planned support to our member countries in enhancing and implementing their NDCs, particularly in the Central Asia region. For that, I am pleased to welcome Mr. Binu Parthan, Head of Regions at IRENA. Binu, you may have the floor, please.
Thanks very much, Prasoon, and good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Our job is a lot easier after that excellent perspectives from the UK, articulating their objectives for the UK incoming presidency, and also sharing the example of the UK, and also a strong message from the Secretariat, UNFCCC Secretariat, on the importance of energy sector and also the role of the NDCs. So thanks very much for that. And if I can have the first slide, please. So from the IRENA side, we have good news that we recently published our, next slide, please, our report on costs, which is essentially based on a very deep and impressive collection of project databases on renewable energy. And what we find is that the renewable energy costs have continued to fall. And as was alluded by the ambassador today, that a lot of countries are moving away from fossil fuels. And increasingly, we find that this significant reduction in costs, particularly with offshore wind and solar photovoltaics, has meant that today, most of renewable energy investments are cheaper than the cheapest fossil fuel alternative. And even for a number of fossil fuel powered energy generation stations, we find that investing in new renewables is actually much better than keeping them operating. So these are very strong trends that we see from our report, and this is something that might offer a compelling evidence to governments in this region and beyond. This report is available on the IRENA website, and I'm sure that one of my colleagues will share the links to this in the chat box. Please do look at this and take advantage of these impressive trends, downward trends in renewable energy costs, which are being seen around the world. What is also impressive, as you will see in that graph, that consistently, perhaps more markedly over the last 10 years or so, renewable energy has actually outpaced fossil fuel investments in the power systems around the world. While this is quite impressive, this probably is not enough to take us in line with the Paris Agreement objectives. And so a lot more needs to be done to accelerate this trend and take us towards the net zero carbon neutrality by mid-century that we aim for. Next slide, please. We also published last week an updated World Energy Transition Outlook, which is providing a roadmap for the world to achieve the 1.5-degree pathway, which is set out in the Paris Agreement. The key message from there is that the 1.5-degree pathway is indeed possible, and with technologies which are mature and available today. And what is very interesting in the last week's report that we published is that we are finding that this transition and compliance with Paris Agreement can happen without compromising the growth that is needed for our development. In fact, it is shown that there could be significant incremental growth of our global GDP as we transform on this 1.5-degree pathway. What is also very interesting, and I think there was this excellent example from the UK alluded to by Ambassador Moran, that UK has now added a lot more green jobs by phasing out coal. And this is exactly what we see, is that we do see that about 122 million new jobs will be created, effectively doubling the energy sector jobs in this transitory period. So what that essentially means is that if we embark on a 1.5-degree pathway, aligning ourselves with the Paris Agreement, we are going to have much better growth in our global GDP, and we're going to double the job opportunities in this sector and beyond. So that, to me, sounds like a very compelling proposition. And you'll again find this report on the IRENA website. And I'm sure that one of my colleagues will provide the link to this report in the chat box. Just in terms of the technologies, we do find, and I think it was alluded to by James Grabert, that we need to electrify, and we see electrification of end users, particularly transport and buildings, as a key determinant of this energy transition. So electricity, we find that will become the major energy carrier in the future. And we would expect 90% of this electricity to come from renewable energy, increasing the role of renewable energy. We do see some limited role for fossil fuels, but significantly less. And as was also alluded to by James Grabert, we see an increased role for fuels such as green hydrogen, entirely powered by renewable energy, which could provide a pathway to decarbonize some of these difficult sectors to decarbonize, like industry or long distance transport, etc. So there are solutions, there are benefits, and there is a pathway to achieve the Paris Agreement objectives. So please look at this report, and we are very happy to work with any of IRENA members on how to translate this vision outlined in the veto to the national level and translate that in terms of policies and regulations, and hopefully facilitate some financing. Next slide, please. We also looked at what has been submitted in the NDCs, particularly with respect to renewable energy. And this is slightly outdated. This is the status as of April this year. So out of almost 190 NDCs, which are submitted up until beginning of April, we found that while 134 does mention renewable energy and quantifiable targets, but that only represents almost half of what is possible with renewable energy. So there is a gap between what is possible and what's being reflected in the NDCs. And this is something which is really driving our effort to work closely with countries in this region and beyond to increase the role of renewable energy to the ambition which effectively reflects these cost trends and the opportunities that we see in our analytical work. And this is something which we plan to intensify as we go forward. What is also Where we see a significant scope is also in the LTS. Only 26 of these NDCs, about 190, does consider the opportunity for net zero by 2050. And there again, we see the significant hope for opportunity for reflecting some of this IRENA's analytical work. And this is an area we plan to intensify our work, working with countries on LTS and supporting the inputs into the LTS, particularly to help countries realize the full potential of renewable energy in the long-term strategies. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of IRENA's engagement globally. So over the last 1 year or so, we have engaged with almost 70 of our members. And this whole effort has essentially been done with partners such as the UNDP and its Climate Promise, a valuable partner, and also the NDC partnerships programs. And together and with other partners around the world, we've engaged with about 70 of our members. And we have used a set of tools of IRENA support services to work with these countries, address various gaps in their capabilities, their understanding, the analytical abilities, to create a better role for renewable energy in their planned NDC submissions. So this is something where we have seen some results. About 11 countries which have submitted NDC so far have actually benefited from IRENA support. And a lot more are under work. And we see the effects of that being reflected in the current NDCs and the future NDC updates in a few years' time. But I think the partnership already exists, and we hope to continue intensifying that in the coming years or so. We've also, and if you look at the emissions on a cumulative level, this effort covers almost 3 billion tons of CO2 emissions on an annual basis, but there is a lot more opportunity for us to engage, and we intend to do so. We've also been active in Central Asia. As you can see, there are 3 countries, and as was alluded to by Director General Francesco La Camera, we are working in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, and we'll share some details of that with you in a short while. Next slide, please. So these are some of these key packages that we have developed. So some of the areas where we see a lot of demand is really data and statistics. So essentially MRV systems to at the national level to ensure that all these emission reductions are properly quantified, and then there is a national level mechanism to monitor the impact of these actions on the national GHG inventories and how that interplays with the global commitments. We've also been using a very potent tool called the Renewable Readiness Assessment, something which we have worked with Kyrgyzstan in this region, where we do, through a nationally led consultative process, identify a set of actions which the country then takes forward, which mainstreams the renewable energy and addresses some of the gaps and barriers that we do find at the country level. And this is a country-led, country-owned process, and on the basis of which we do provide inputs to the NDCs. There were several other packages. Another important package is really the resource assessment. Often the suitability of variable renewable energy sources like solar and wind is not often evident to the policymakers. So we, through a Global Atlas program, provide support to countries. And this is, again, another effort that we are supporting Kyrgyzstan with. And there are several other opportunities like long-term energy planning, which provides a better basis for integrating renewables and planning for renewable integration, etc. And there are others also. But as was mentioned by James Grabert earlier, what is more important is the implementation of NDCs. So articulating a higher level of ambition in the NDCs to be submitted is one thing, but going beyond that, how do you actually implement those commitments? What are the policy and the regulatory frameworks that need to be put in place? What are the innovative procurement programs which need to be put in place in the countries to ramp up renewable energy? what is the role of international finance in project facilitation. So these are important things that we are looking into. And what we are increasingly seeing is that IRENA's NDC portfolio is clearly moving towards NDC implementation. And this is something where we consider very important. And today, we will also have our Director for Project Facilitation Support, Ahmed Badr, chairing one of these panels, again underlying the importance that IRENA attaches to the NDC implementation and project facilitation. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of where we are active in the region. And as I did mention, we're active in 3 countries on issues such as data and statistics, resource assessment and support. Also importantly, capacity building, not just on policies, but also on technologies. We have a team in Bonn looking at renewable energy technologies and various innovations which are happening, not just on hard technologies, but also on business models, market design, etc. So that is also a space in which we are active. And as I did mention, the Renewable Readiness Assessment, one of the flagship products of IRENA, working at the country level with country ownership. Next slide, please. And final point I'd like to make is really, how do we translate these actions at the region level or the sub-region level? So a very clear plan from IRENA in the framework of the climate investment platform and the investment forums that we plan to organize in this region and beyond is really to combine 3 aspects of it. So one is the matchmaking of bankable projects with financiers. And the main tool that we have is the CIP, the Climate Investment Platform, directed by Ahmed Badr, who will be speaking to you a short while. And this is a partnership we have with UNDP and also in collaboration with the SC for All and the Green Climate Fund, which aims to facilitate financing to projects which have high potential, but might actually be risky for several reasons. So trying to make that link between available finance and need for financing for renewable energy projects on the ground. So this is going to be the centerpiece of these investment forums. But at the same time, we'll also try to have dialogues with the government and the private sector to create an enabling framework, addressing some of the gaps that project developers and financiers see, which probably increases the pricing for these financial products. So perhaps increases the risk to a level which is not manageable. So we believe having these discussions between the government and financiers and project developers is important. So this is also something that we will integrate into this investment forum approach. And also, as we have always done, at the sub-region level, there are opportunities to do capacity building on areas such as long-term planning, specific instruments and policies for mainstreaming renewable energy and accelerating that. So we will combine these 3, the project facilitation, enabling frameworks and capacity building. And this is something where we hope that the effects of the pandemic abate soon so that we can roll out these investment forums. And this is also one element in IRENA's support to countries where we go beyond our traditional domains of analytical work and step into project facilitation and support. So next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to conclude on a positive note to say that IRENA has these analytical products, which is bringing you the key trends and the information, which will allow the governments and key stakeholders at the national level in this region and beyond to take action, which is compatible with the Paris Agreement goals. But we will in future go one step further, get involved with project facilitation, and then try to bring leverage that strength that IRENA has in its track record with project facilitation to ensure that some of these commitments which are enshrined in NDCs will actually be implemented with a facilitation role for IRENA. So please reach out to us to know more about our work on VETO, the World Energy Transition Outlook, our cost report, or project facilitation. My colleague, Prasoon, Alexandra, me, or my director, Gurbus Gonyul, will all be available to support you. So thank you very much, and back to you, Prasoon.
Thank you, Binu, for this very comprehensive presentation and for highlighting some of the key insights from IRENA's work. I'm sure many of these messages will resonate during the panel discussion that will follow. As the next item on the program, we'll have our first panel discussion on the experiences, opportunities, and best practices for the enhancement and implementation of NDCs and LTS. For that, I'm very pleased to welcome Ms. Amanda McKee to introduce the session, the panelists, and to moderate the discussion. Just to quickly introduce our moderator, so Amanda is the head of Climate Action Enhancement Package and the head of knowledge management at the NDC Partnership. In this role, Amanda oversees the partnership support to countries to enhance the quality and increase the ambition of their NDCs as part of the 2020 update process, and also manages NDC Partnerships Technical Assistance Fund. Amanda, you have the floor, please.
Great. Well, thank you, Prasoon. And like you said, I have the pleasure of leading us through today's first panel session. We're lucky today to be hearing from a really distinguished panel of experts who will share with us some of their insights from working in the region, looking at their experiences, and the opportunities and best practices that they see for enhancement and implementation of NDCs and LTS. So as Prasoon introduced, I'm with the NDC Partnership Support Unit. For those of you who don't know the partnership, we are a coalition of close to 200 countries and institutions. And through the NDC Partnership, our members leverage their resources and expertise to provide countries with the tools that they need to enhance and implement their NDCs. Since 2016, our members have been actively supporting governments in defining processes, policies, and plans that are required to deliver on their NDC goals, along with other development objectives. In 2019, we launched a special program called the Climate Action Enhancement Package, or CAP for short, to ensure that dedicated support was available for the NDC update effort, so complementing implementation. And through this, drawing together over 40 of our implementing partners, we're supporting 67 countries in developing NDCs that are not just more ambitious, but are also higher quality and have been developed through more inclusive processes. This support is being provided globally, but in the Central Asian region specifically, we've had the privilege of supporting Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And so before I introduce today's panel, I wanted to just quickly share 3 reflections on how we see countries approaching their NDC updates through the work of the NDC Partnership. The first is looking within the support that our partnership members are providing on the NDC update. We see that 17% of all the requests are actually focused on the energy sector. This is really important. It's demonstrating how big the energy sector is. It's the biggest single sector that we see support going through. We see a lot of requests for support coming from countries. And we also see the critical importance that countries are placing on this sector in their NDC document and in their emission reduction efforts. And as a member of the partnership, IRENA's leadership in supporting countries' NDC update and implementation planning processes has really been exemplary. IRENA is supporting 50 activities across 25 countries globally through the NDC Partnership, along with other critical partners that we'll hear from today, like GIZ and UNDP. The second insight I wanted to share is that while we know that we're behind on our global ambition efforts, we're actually seeing that the NDCs submitted today are a lot higher quality and a lot stronger than the first ones. And this is really important for us to draw from and to learn from. We need to take this learning forward so that we can raise our ambition. One example is that we're seeing NDCs backed by strong sectoral data, by engagement with sectoral ministries, helping to ensure that the targets that are set are realistic and implementable. And the third and final point I just wanted to raise is really the link between targets and implementation, and that we can't overlook this. Realistic and credible NDCs are what will enable more effective NDC implementation. And our experience through the partnership is that through well-supported implementation, countries will actually find opportunities to unlock higher ambition. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn to our panel today. We'll be hearing from a number of distinguished speakers. First, I'd like to note that we do have a very limited amount of time and there's a lot of great content to cover. So we will be keeping everyone closely to time. I propose to do a first round where I will ask each panelist to address a specific question, keeping their response to no more than 2 minutes each. And I do apologize in advance as I will need to interrupt you if you're going over. And if time permits, I'll follow up with some additional questions, drawing out some further details. And I kindly ask that the follow-up responses also be limited to 2 minutes so we can ensure we have time to hear from everyone. So with that, I have the pleasure of turning to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Ms. Jana Kopernik, the Global Technical Specialist on Energy with UNDP in the Istanbul Regional Hub. Now, UNDP has played a central role in the region through their climate promise work, as well as the other support that they're providing. And so to kick us off, we'll be hearing from UNDP's broad experience before diving into some of our country examples. And so Ms. Kopernik, the first question is yours, and would love to hear from you. Based on your experience in the region, what enabling role can intergovernmental processes and international organizations play in advancing the energy sector transformation, both through NDC enhancement and implementation? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Amanda, and I would like to first thank Arena for organizing this event. I'm very pleased to be part of the panel. What we have learned this year at UNDP when engaging the countries in Europe and Central Asia is that 87% of them identified energy as either an existing sector to be reviewed and updated in the NDC process or a new sector to be added. So observing this positive development linked to an increased attention to energy, international organizations can assist countries, including those in Central Asia, in several ways. And here I would want to mention a couple of them. At the NDC development stage, IOs can play an instrumental role through provision of international expertise and advocacy, making the NDCs as well as long-term strategies more robust and implementable. UNDP, which I'm very pleased to represent, has scaled up its efforts to help countries in setting climate and energy goals through the so-called climate promise, about which you have already heard. It was launched in 2019, and the climate promise really aims to provide assistance currently in 118 countries in reviewing, aligning, updating existing or newly proposed targets and measures, including those which are specific to energy. Under the climate promise, we and the partners also try to support the governments in building political will and social ownership of the proposed measures, without which basically the success of NDC could be easily undermined. More specifically, in the Central Asia region, the NDC enhancement support is heavily focused on energy, which I'm very pleased about, and includes support related to, for instance, energy resource mapping, policy dialogue, and legal reform. We equally provide support in conducting specialized studies or supporting governments in stakeholder mapping. As mentioned by IRENA Director General, Mr. Parkan, this is all done through valuable partnerships, which are formed among more than 35 different entities. The second point I would want to make is in relation to the NDC implementation stage itself. Countries in the Central Asian region face often very similar challenges, as well as some of the opportunities associated with energy generation, transmission, and related infrastructure. Overall, the regional landscape, we can say, offers good conditions for deployment of renewable energy sources, as well as increase of energy efficiency across buildings, cities, and industries. And what we can say is also that this potential is to a different degree already recognized in the NDCs in this region. However, realizing this target will require access to appropriate expertise and adequate resources. And this is also a space where international organizations can come in and provide support. This can be done by facilitating access to climate finance through project pipeline development, as well as building capacity for the countries themselves to access the climate finance. Equally, UNDP as well as other international organizations often support design of regulatory and policy frameworks around, for instance, removing fossil fuel subsidies. And the last point I would want to make is that international organizations should be also seen as partnership brokers, as they can really help the governments to bring together different donors, NGOs, academia, financial institutions, youth, or private sector to really ensure complementarity and inclusion. Let me stop with that and hand over to Amanda. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jana. And I love to hear the description of UNDP as a partnership broker. I think that exactly summarizes the role and the advantage that you bring in the region. So I'd like to move to our second speaker now, which is Mr. Zamirbek Temirbekov, who's the acting head of the Department for Energy Efficiency, Energy Savings, and Renewable Energy Development in the Ministry of Energy, Kyrgyzstan. As I mentioned at the outset, the NDC partnership has had the privilege of supporting Kyrgyzstan in its NDC update. And actually, this support is being delivered through UNDP. In addition to updates to the NDC document, we're seeing updates to fast-track implementation through a 10-year implementation plan. So, Mr. Temirbekov, my first question to you is, what are some key actions that Kyrgyzstan has taken or plans to take to align their NDC targets and implementation, specifically for renewable energy, with national development priorities, objectives, and what circumstances can be leveraged in this process? Please, the floor is yours.
Спасибо. Здравствуйте, дорогие участники этого конференции. Я хочу ответить на ваш вопрос таким образом, что по ВИЭ хочу сказать, вот реализация запланированных проектов позволит увеличить мощность энергосистемы Кыргызстана на 10% за счет пользования ВИЭ к 2040 году. В первую очередь за счет использования генерации малых гидроэлектростанций, биогазового, ветрового потенциала, солнечной энергии. В сфере энергоэффективности планируется использовать геотермальную энергию через внедрение тепловых насосов, а также солнечных коллекторов для горячего водоснабжения и обогрева. Разработан пакет нормативных актов по поддержке ВИЭ, таких как повышенный тариф для энергии от ВИЭ, повышающий коэффициент 1,3, гарантия сбыта энергии, ближайшие распределитель-компании, беспошлинный ввоз оборудования ВИЭ, налоговые льготы. Запущен процесс по принятию актов, регулирующих порядков и процедуры отвода земель, разработка технико-экономических обоснований, проектирование и строительство малых гидроэлектростанций и других ВИЭ. Я пока вот на этом хочу останавливаться. У нас такие мероприятия принимаются, скажу так. И следующее слово вот предоставляю вам.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Temirbekov. And I want to follow up on that with another question. And I'm hoping you can tell us what the current energy sector dynamics are and what you see as the expected role for renewable energy. In addition to that, if you could say a little bit about the status of the NDC revision process in your country and what you see as the key priorities for the updated NDC.
Какова текущая динамика? Да? Вот, в Кыргызской республике в порядке 86% электроэнергии вырабатывается на ГЭС, гидроэлектростанциях. В этом ежегодно потребление электроэнергии растет вот на 4%. В настоящее время в Кыргызстане вступил и циклический период маловодья до 2022 года. И существует риск ограничения подачи электроэнергии потребителям. Кыргызская республика вынуждена покрывать свои электропотребности за счет поставок из Казахстана и других стран. В связи с этим стал вопрос об альтернативных источниках генерации Кыргызской республики. В первую очередь рассматривается потенциал ВИЭ. На сегодня потенциал ВИЭ используется менее чем на 1%. А от имеющегося это только малый ГЭС. Для диверсификации генерации электроэнергии необходимо сооружение солнечных и ветровых электроустановок, также промышленных биогазовых комплексов с ростом выработки электроэнергии ВИЭ до 1,2 миллиарда киловатт-час к 2030 году. Однако для развития ВИЭ в Кыргызстане нуждается в поддержке доноров и международных организаций, а именно в пилотировании проекта ФЭС мощностью 20-50 мегаватт. Вот, солнечные электростанции. И в основном современных биогазовых технологий комплексов объемом 5000 куб и в проектированиях и подготовке площадок для создания ветровых ферм мощностью 15, где-то 50 мегаватт. Только при условии внешней поддержки можно достичь амбициозных задач на 10% максимум, используя ВИЭ в Кыргызской республике. Самостоятельно страной возможно освоение не более 2% потенциала ВИЭ. Вот такая у нас условия. Спасибо. Передаю вам.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Temirbekov. And it's really, I think, critical to lay out the links across the region and the interdependency that countries face, not just in their energy supply, but ultimately in the reduction of emissions. I want to turn to our next speaker, which is Mr. Uzahaz Agavakov, the Director of the Department of Climate Policy and Green Technology with the Ministry of Ecology, Geology, and Natural Resources of the Republic of Kazakhstan. So through the country's first NDC in 2016, the Republic of Kazakhstan set an unconditional economy-wide target of 15% and a conditional target that's much higher at 25%. And the country is now working on their updated NDC. So Mr. Agavakov, I'd love to hear from you. Kazakhstan has set this ambitious renewable energy target within its NDC, and the country has subsequently announced a further ambitious decarbonization target for 2060. Could you kindly elaborate on how this target could contribute to Kazakhstan's sustainable development and what you see as the key drivers for this target, especially given the importance of conventional energy resources in the country? And so please, the floor is yours.
Уважаемые участники совещания, позвольте в первую очередь поприветствовать вас, поблагодарить организацию АРЭН за поддержку, осуществляемую в нашей стране, нашему региону в целом, да, и извиниться за опоздание. У нас тут такой, скажем так, цейтнот по времени произошел. Поэтому сразу перейду к докладу, чтобы не отнимать никакого времени. Первое, что хочу сказать, да, моделирование, скажем так, сценария выполнения Парижского соглашения, в частности, исполнение обязательств сокращения выбросов на 15% от уровня 90-го года, показало, что структура электроэнергетики должна выглядеть следующим образом. Да? Это порядка 25% доля ВИЭ должна быть, около 25% доля газовой генерации, ну и, соответственно, остальные это там около 10% крупных ГЭС и около 40% угольной генерации. Как вам известно, Казахстан очень углеродоемкая экономика, где в структуре производства электроэнергии уголь занимает значительную долю. И тем не менее, те вызовы, которые мы видим, да, те тренды мировые, которые ведут нас, скажем так, к решению проблем с изменением климата. Как вам известно, Казахстан тоже испытывает большие негативные влияния, последствия от изменения климата. Да? Мы являемся, наверное, одной из самых отдаленных стран от моря, от океана. Температура в нашем регионе повышается очень значительно быстрее, нежели в среднем по миру. Поэтому эти риски, связанные с изменением климата, для нас тоже очень важны. Соответственно, исходя из этого, мы поставили задачу, президент поставил задачу, дал обещание о том, что Казахстан станет углеродно-нейтральным к 2060 году. Теперь наша работа строится здесь по двум направлениям. Первое – это выполнение обязательств до 30 года минус 15%. Какие меры здесь предусмотрены. Около 54 мер были выработаны для выполнения этих обязательств. Это целый набор мер как секторальных политик изменения, так и институциональных мер. В частности, к примеру, можно сказать, что, опять же, моделирование показало, что без внедрения наряду с ужесточением СТВ, системы торговли выбросами парниковых газов, которая у нас существует с 2013 года, наряду с этим необходимо будет внедрять углеродный налог. Мы предусматриваем 4 вида такого углеродного налога, пока рассматривается возможность. Это налог на топливо. Да. Единственным моментом здесь будет то, что данный налог не будет распространяться на сектор производства электроэнергии и теплоэнергии, так как он уже участвует в системе торговли выбросами парниковых газов. Помимо этого предусмотрены в целях защиты внутреннего рынка, да, это импортная углеродная пошлина для защиты наших, скажем так, компаний, которые участвуют в системе торговли, которые ведут модернизацию своего производства в целях сокращения выбросов парниковых газов. Соответственно, продукция их становится на порядок выше, дороже, чем продукция тех стран, в которых данные меры, соседних стран, в которых данные меры не предусмотрены. Вместе с тем обсуждается возможность внедрения экспортной пошлины. Как вам известно, Евросоюз с 2023 года предполагает внедрение пограничного углеродного корректирующего механизма. Да? И одной из мер, одной из возможностей, скажем так, для стран-экспортеров – это обеспечение этой платы за углерод внутри страны. Соответственно, такая мера тоже рассматривается. Теперь также рассматривается мера создания карбонового фонда для того, чтобы те средства, которые мы получаем от налога, от углеродного налога, от продажи квот в рамках системы торговли выбросами, для дальнейшего реинвестирования уже в проекты, в ассетные проекты, которые позволят нам обеспечить сокращение выбросов в тех секторах, в которых, скажем так, данные меры регулирования в значительной степени не влияют. Последнее, что хотелось бы еще отметить, очень много мер там секторальных, да, это в части снижения потерь, электропотерь, теплопотерь на сетях и так далее, там, использование различных видов технологий в секторе ЖКХ, цементной отрасли. Наряду с этим мы сейчас ведем разработку концепции низкоуглеродного развития до 50-го года, а также сценария углеродной нейтральности до 60-го года. Концепция низкоуглеродного развития показала, что мы можем сократить к 50-му году выбросы, да, до 70% от базовой линии. Для этого, естественно, потребуется большое количество инвестиций. Сейчас диапазон этих потребностей в инвестициях составляет от 350 миллиардов долларов до 600 миллиардов долларов. Поэтому, скажем, такой вызов для нас в целях декарбонизации нашей экономики очень большой. Опять же, отмечу, с учетом нашей углеродоемкости. Но, тем не менее, как президент уже объявил, мы привержены достижению этих целей. Соответствующая работа сейчас проводится. Я не знаю, здесь есть ли сотрудники компании GIZ, которые активно нас поддерживают в данном вопросе. Поэтому сценарий углеродной нейтральности и конкретно, что необходимо будет для, скажем, его выполнения, мы результаты получим чуть позже, где-то ближе к сентябрю месяцу. Вкратце, в принципе, так. Спасибо.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Agavakov. I'm going to turn to our next speaker, Mrs. Olga Belorusova, who's the head of the Department for Monitoring and Soil Pollution in the Center of Hydrometeorological Services for the Republic of Uzbekistan. So the first question that I have for you, Mrs. Belorusova, is within the context of the current NDC review process, can you tell us, is Uzbekistan planning to align its NDC with the wider economic development plans, including long-term energy strategies? And what do you see as the expected role for renewable energy in these plans? And if you could please try to keep your response to 2 minutes. The floor is yours. It looks like you're still muted. There you go. You can hear me now.
Извините. Здравствуйте, уважаемая госпожа Аманда Маки, уважаемые участники встречи. Мне очень приятно представлять информацию от нашей страны. Я хочу сказать, что в данный момент в Узбекистане завершена подготовка инвентаризации парниковых газов, которая будет являться основой для оценок нашего потенциала сокращения выбросов и наших обязательств, которые мы, конечно, будем пересматривать, как и все мировое сообщество в контексте приближающейся встречи КОП-26. Сейчас на данный момент происходит рассмотрение и согласование пересмотренных обязательств по Парижскому соглашению Республики Узбекистан. К тому же у нас в 2019 году в стране принята стратегия по переходу Республики Узбекистан на зеленую экономику, в которой уже обозначены основные направления нашей деятельности, которые помогут сократить выбросы и приблизиться к реализации обязательств, и в том числе повысить наши амбиции. Это такие направления, как повышение энергоэффективности во всех секторах экономики, особенно наиболее энергоемких. Это диверсификация производства электрической и тепловой энергии с увеличением доли возобновляемых источников энергии до 25%, как минимум 25% к 2030 году. В настоящий момент по состоянию на 2019 год у нас была информация уже подтвержденная. Производство электрической энергии происходило в основном за счет природного газа, более 80%. К 2030 году, согласно концепции обеспечения Республики Узбекистан электрической энергией, планируется сократить долю природного газа в структуре производства электрической энергии до 50% и увеличить долю возобновляемых источников, это гидроэлектростанции, а также широкое внедрение солнечных фотоэлектрических станций и ветровой энергетики. Сейчас уже начата реализация многих инвестиционных проектов в этом направлении, а также проводятся работы по привлечению дальнейших инвестиций в эту отрасль как наиболее перспективную. И также сейчас происходит разработка в стране стратегии по изменению климата до 2030 года, в которой также будут обозначены основные приоритетные направления по борьбе с изменением климата.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Belarusova. I'm going to hopefully come back, but for the sake of time, I want to move on to our next speaker, which is Mr. Karim Sapar Muhammadov, the Chief Specialist in Service of Renewable Energy Sources with the Ministry of Energy for Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan submitted its first NDC in 2016, and the NDC notes that the country's economy has the potential to further reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, conditional on further financial and technical support. And so it would be great to hear from you. The country considers energy transition as one of the key priorities, and the recently adopted 2030 roadmap for renewable energy development is one of the latest achievements on the energy transition pathway. Could you please share with us what are some of the short and long-term plans for renewables, especially in the context of your country's NDC? Please, the floor is yours.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые участники. В настоящее время одной из главных задач перед мировым сообществом становится вопрос о применении возобновляемых источников энергии, что позволит снизить объем вредных выбросов в окружающую среду. В этой связи в Туркменистане усилием уважаемого президента проводится огромная работа по внедрению возобновляемых источников энергии в производство. В целях диверсификации топливно-энергетических ресурсов Туркменистана, увеличения экспорта электрической энергии, обеспечения отдаленных районов электроэнергии, а также чистой энергии, улучшение социально-бытовых условий жизни населения и развития промышленности, а также для достижения целей стабильного развития и Парижского соглашения по климату, постановлением президента Туркменистана 4 апреля 2020 года утверждена национальная стратегия по возобновляемой энергетике Туркменистана до 2030 года. В целях обеспечения стабильного развития регионов страны, расширения использования возобновляемых источников энергии, на данный момент постановлением президента Туркменистана 12 апреля 2019 года утверждена концепция развития региона Туркменского озера Алтнасер на 2019-2025 года. В рамках реализации этой концепции ведутся проектные работы по строительству солнечной и ветровой электростанций общей мощностью 10 мегаватт. 13 марта 2021 года проводилось заседание Меджлиса Туркменистана 6-го созыва, где был принят закон о возобновляемых источниках энергии. В законе придается особо важное значение окружающей среде, рациональному использованию природных ресурсов, постепенному переходу к зеленой экономике, в нефтегазовой системе, электроэнергетике, химической промышленности, транспортной системе и других отраслях страны внедряются новые экологически чистые технологии. Спасибо.
Great, thank you so much. With that, I want to switch gears slightly and turn to our sixth and final panelist. And if time allows, I'll come back and ask some additional questions of other panelists. But our last panelist is Mr. Johannes Schumann, who's the project director supporting green economy in Kazakhstan and Central Asia with GIZ. And Dr. Schumann brings vast experience leading climate projects in the region, bringing in specific insights into low emission development strategies. And so to start, Dr. Schumann, can you please elaborate on how international partners such as GIZ are working on the ground to support Central Asia in raising its climate ambitions?
Thank you very much. I fear that you do see me twice, don't you? Okay, then I will try to switch off one. It seems a bit, so okay, now I think it's better. So thank you very much for inviting me to that session. Well, we do have various activities to raise the ambitions in our partner country in Kazakhstan. So the first one, I think the most important one is most probably that we do provide macroeconomic modeling and sectoral modeling to decision makers to raise their ambition by showing what is the impact of various ambition levels. And we do not only model the investment needs for the various ambition levels, but also show how these various ambition levels do contribute to wider economic and social development, for example, also to health. And what we found very useful also is that we do consider and factor in also the global trend in decarbonization, because main trading partners of Kazakhstan have already pledged to become carbon neutral in 2050 or 2060, and that of course impacts the economy of Kazakhstan. In addition to that, we do then back cars, meaning we analyze back what changes in infrastructure and technologies are needed to fulfill, to reach these ambitious targets. So that is one activity. The The second activity, which I also found so far quite important, are stakeholder consultations. So we do engage with partners and representatives from state, business, society on the national, but also on the local level to reach a consensus, a broad consensus on ambitious targets. And last but not least, to my mind, ambitious climate policy, ambitious targets are not a one-off decision. It's rather a process of ever more ambitious decisions. This is why we do cooperate with and build a capacity of local partners, both in the modeling and in stakeholder consultation, so that they can continue the work once the project has finished. And in Kazakhstan, for modeling, is Shazil Damu, just for your information, for our partners from other Central Asian countries, and for stakeholder consultations, the Association of Environmental Organizations of Kazakhstan. And I'm would be very happy, actually, also following up on this conference to provide more details to our partners in other Central Asian countries. And in the chat, if you allow, I would then drop my email address, if that is possible, so that whoever is interested from other Central Asian countries can make contact.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Schumann. And we are running right against time, and so I'd encourage participants to follow up over email if there are questions on that. I did just have one last question for you, though, Dr. Schumann, and I hope you can keep your response very brief. I think we have 30 seconds, but if there's anything that you can say specifically about the opportunities and barriers for low emission development strategies based on your experience in the country, and I think also based on the experience you've had working in Kazakhstan. Would love to hear some final thoughts from you on that.
Yeah, so the main opportunity we see in Kazakhstan is that decarbonization is clearly economically beneficial for Kazakhstan. So our modeling shows that in a deep decarbonization scenario, GDP until 2050 will increase by 35% in comparison to a business as usual scenario. That is clear. That's a clear opportunity. And that is partly driven by the need for investments, but also by the fact that the economy gets more competitive. When we talk about investments, then we also come to the barriers. The main barriers, to my mind, in Kazakhstan, but also in other countries in Central Asia, are the following. As long as prices for coal and for petrol and tariffs for electricity and for waste are well below market value, we will not see sufficient incentives for investments. And so one challenge and one task is, of course, to deregulate these prices, bring them back to market value, and of course to balance that, to have respective social policies.
Great, thank you for that. And I know we are right at time. I would have loved to have an opportunity to go and hear more from the panelists, but unfortunately we do have to move on. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, for sharing your experiences, and we look forward to seeing the new and updated NDCs that you will be submitting. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Prasoon.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks a lot to our distinguished panelists for the very insightful discussions. I think it's really encouraging to hear the ambitious efforts on LDC and LTS from our national counterparts, and the strong support available from several development partners in this direction. Special thanks to you, Amanda, for the excellent moderation and also for being very strict on time. Well, without losing much of time, we will now move on to our second panel discussion on mobilizing renewable energy financing at scale and de-risking investments for energy transition. And I would like to welcome my colleague, Mr. Ahmed Badr, who will moderate this session and the discussions. Just by way of a quick introduction, Mr. Badr is the Director of Project Facilitation and Support, a new division of IRENA that offers member countries dedicated project implementation support. In his role, he also spearheads the agency's implementation of the Climate Investment Platform, a multi-stakeholder platform established in partnership with SE for All, the UNDP, and in coordination with Green Climate Fund, to streamline access to climate funding for developing countries and advance renewables deployment. Mr. Badr brings with him more than 30 years of international experience in the field of banking and finance. Ahmed, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Prasoon, for introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all audience who are joining today's webinar. Following the scene-setting presentation by my colleague Pino, I would like to complement it with relevant background to pave the way for an interactive discussion among our distinguished panelists. As we are all aware, in 2015, during COP21 in Paris, the different parties agreed to pursue their best efforts to maintain the global temperature increase well below 2 degrees Celsius, or even further 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. And parties at that time committed themselves to achieve these long-term climate goals through NDCs and long-term low-emission development strategies. And I would like here to highlight that emissions from energy sector accounts for around 2/3 of the global greenhouse gas emissions. However, from IRENA perspective, we estimate that by 2050, the accelerated deployment of renewables and implementation of energy efficiency strategies could potentially achieve around 90% of the required emission reductions. Thus, summing up efforts to decarbonize the global energy systems is vital to meet the climate mitigation goals of Paris Agreement. Following the interest discussion by Amanda and distinguished speakers in the first panel, Central Asia really has a great variety of renewable energy resources, but in many cases still largely untapped. While hydropower makes an important contribution to the energy mix in Central Asia countries, vast resources for biomass, wind, and solar could be also harnessed to provide the region with clean and indigenous and cost-effective and sustainable energy supply. As expressed in Astana communique on accelerating the uptake of renewable energy in Central Asia, the countries are committed to scaling up all forms of renewable energy in line with adopted targets extended to 2030 and beyond. Therefore, aligning the recovery plans with Paris Agreement objective and low emission development strategies, which can help accelerate this sustainable energy transition in the region, and subsequent to a first round of NDC submissions as presented by Pino, IRENA, in collaboration with UK COP26 presidency, has organized a series of regional expert meetings on climate change, enhanced NDCs and renewable energy deployments. And today's session will basically fall within the regional focus on scaling up renewable energy investment and their de-risking in Central Asia with the following objective. Number one, that we hope to achieve today in today's discussion, encouraging more ambitious climate action by all governments in Central Asia, including submission of updated long-term climate and energy strategies in support of the goals set out in Paris Agreement. Secondly, deepening the understanding on opportunities offered by the energy sector in the decarbonized efforts. Third, discussing the key role of mobilizing energy financing at scale and de-risking investments in Central Asian countries to accelerate energy transition. And finally, to share experiences across the region on long-term climate and energy strategies, and from analysis and studies by regional and international institutions, starting with IRENA. Today, we have the honor to host 5 top-notch global renewable energy experts. And before hearing from them, I would like to shed light on their short bios, starting with Mr. Damir Narbayev, who was basically the head of Department for the Development of Oil and Gas and Energy Industries of KAZ Energy. Among key activities, KAZ Energy Association takes part in the work on the improvement of environment legislation and develops a unified position of the members of the association, including enterprises of the oil and gas and energy complex, improving the legislation and regulatory framework of nature management in cooperation with the state bodies, and also represents the position of the member of the association in solving environmental problems. Welcome, Mr. Narbayev. Also, I have the honor as an ex-EBRD staff, Ms. Veronica Karakovic, who is the Associate Director and Senior Banker in Eurasia Energy team within the infrastructure group of the EBRD in London. And she's also the regional head for the Eurasia Energy. Veronica joined EBRD after I left EBRD. She joined in 2014 and has been focused on the power and natural resources industries. And prior to joining EBRD, Ms. Karakovic worked in the corporate finance department of Pricewaterhouse in Russia. And she has the honors degree from the State University Higher School of Economics in Russia. Welcome, Veronica. We also have with us today Mr. Mohammed Al Sayed, manager of the Private-Public Partnership division in ISDB. Mohammed is a close friend, and I know him a few years back. And he is basically responsible for the development, structuring, and delivering of the bank's private-public partnership portfolio across their 57 countries. Prior to his current role, Mohammed was the manager of the Economic Infrastructure Division at Islamic Development Bank, leading the bank's effort on policies and strategies on energy and also in projects and transport and ICT through all member countries of the bank. And he has more than 20 years of experience in designing, implementation, and financing infrastructure projects in both public and private sectors. He occupied earlier several senior positions in the Islamic Development Bank, and his career is focused on delivering an integrated solution for improving infrastructure projects, as I mentioned earlier. He is also a member of UN Technical Advisory Group of SDG 7 and of Sustainable Mobility for All Steering Committee and of the MDB Infrastructure Cooperation Platform. And prior to joining the bank, he used to work for Motorola in Dallas, Texas, United States, in which he has also had his bachelor degree in electrical engineering from the States, from Louisiana State University, and also his master degree in management from University of Texas at Dallas and US. Welcome, Mohammed. I don't know if I don't see if Mr. Suhail joined or not yet. I'm just looking. I don't see he's joining. So I will go to also Mr. Walid Sarraf. So Mr. Walid Sarraf is a Senior Investment Officer in the Infrastructure Department of IFC based in Istanbul, Turkey, and he has more than 15 years of experience in sourcing, structuring, and monitoring power sector investment across all types of instruments, including debt, mezzanine, equity, and private sector financing for sure, in emerging economies. As part of Europe and Central Asia team, over the past 6 years, Walid has been leading business development efforts and executing investment across the region, Central Asia and Europe, specifically focusing on Turkey, Armenia, and Central Asia. And Walid holds an MBA from London Business School. Welcome, Walid. I think with this introduction, we could start our discussion. And I would like to start with Mr. Narbayev. Damir, over the past 5 years, Kazakhstan has achieved tremendous success in de-risking renewable energy investment and mobilizing investment as well through multiple rounds of successful renewable energy auctions. As countries in Central Asia also pursue similar ambitious pathway, what have been the key learnings that you could share with us? And I would like really to keep our answer to you and by you and everyone to 2 minutes, given that we already started late. Damir, floor is yours.
Спасибо большое за предоставленное слово. Разрешите поприветствовать всех на данной конференции. Благодарим организацию РЭНа за возможность участия на данной конференции. Что касается ключевых уроков в Казахстане. На сегодняшний день принятая в Казахстане законодательная база поддержки ВИИ обеспечивает наиболее высокий уровень стабильности для инвесторов по возобновляемым источникам. Закон о поддержке ВИИ впервые вышел в 2009 году, однако только дальнейшая проработка его с 2013 по 2020 годы дали по-настоящему ощутимый толчок в развитии возобновляемой энергетики в стране. Хотел бы озвучить основные моменты. Первое, что было сделано, это введена централизованная покупка электрической энергии через расчетно-финансовый центр по поддержке ВИИ. Далее основным импульсом было подписание данным центром по возобновляемой энергетике в тейк-контрактах или договоров PPA с инвесторами, в рамках которых гарантируется фиксированный тариф на 15 лет с обязательством выкупа всего объема производства электроэнергии в рамках действующих договоров. В течение 20 лет по аукционной цене такие нормы были положены в законодательство в прошлом году. То есть у инвесторов появилась возможность чуть больше получить гарантированный закуп до 20 лет. Также было введено обязательство для системного оператора по подключению объектов ВИИ к сетям и требования по приоритетной диспетчеризации объектов ВИИ. Также объекты ВИИ имеют у нас освобождение от уплаты электросетевых организаций за передачу электроэнергии. Кроме того, имеется ряд преференций и льгот для проектов. Законодательно они все закреплены. Такие проекты входят в перечень инвестпроектов. В рамках инвестиционного контракта предусмотрены такие преференции, как освобождение от таможенных пошлин, освобождение от земельного налога, от имущественного налога, ну, ряд еще каких-то льгот. И с 2018 года мы перешли на новую систему отбора проектов ВИИ, это аукционные торги. То есть где победителем аукционных торгов становится та компания, которая предложит наименьшую цену. Так, в рамках гарантированной покупки электроэнергии от ВИИ предусмотрена индексация тарифа в рамках снижения рисков финансирования в данный сектор на курс доллара, то есть это 70% от тарифа, и на уровень инфляции порядка 30%. То есть вот эти данные меры государственной поддержки, введенные с 2013 года, они показали свою эффективность. Если привести сравнение, то в 2014 году было у нас где-то 26 объектов, возобновляемых объектов, мощностью порядка 170 мегаватт, то по настоящее время в стране действует около 120 объектов ВИИ уже с установленной мощностью более 1800 мегаватт. Система аукционов позволила добиться значительного снижения цен на зеленую энергетику. Что это позволило для нас? То есть мы сделали прозрачным и понятным процесс отбора проектов и инвесторов и сделали ставку на более эффективные и новые проекты, и технологии. То есть мы получили довольно-таки хороший результат в плане того, что имеется такое максимальное снижение по тарифам, отдельно по видам генерации. Допустим, по солнечным электростанциям было снижение цены до 64%. Все объекты ВИИ размещаются, конечно, с учетом ресурсного потенциала, потребностей в электроэнергии, с учетом готовности инфраструктуры. Рынок ВИИ, он, как мы видим, мы обсуждаем это постоянно, это быстрорастущее направление электроэнергетики, он привлекает все больше инвестиций. Но, однако, несмотря на такое стремление развития данного сектора, а также при активной поддержке законодательной базы, все еще пока есть сложности и ограничивающий рост данной отрасли. Но если коротко, это вот необходимость резервной мощности, это пока еще не конкурентные тарифы с нашей базовой угольной генерацией, да? Есть вопросы по интеграции этих источников в энергосистему. Учитывая тот опыт, который имеется уже в Казахстане, для того, чтобы возобновляемая энергетика эффективно развивалась, все-таки нужно иметь развитую инфраструктуру, считаем, в первую очередь. Я имею в виду, что о чем это пропускная способность электрических сетей и наличие маневренных мощностей в энергосистеме, то есть чтобы была возможность в определенное время сглаживать дисбалансы в энергосистеме. Ну и кроме того, необходимо продолжить разработку наиболее эффективных, оптимальных, скажем так, технических решений в сфере накопления энергии. Ну вот так, если коротко по этому вопросу. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Damir. I will come back to you with the more details on the strategy of Kazakhstan and also on the convening part of the centers that basically you are working on to push for these good results. Let me move now to Ms. Karakovic, and I would like Veronica to start by this, since again, I'm very proud that I used to be part of EBRD. So EBRD has close to almost $12 billion committed to investment in the countries of Central Asia, combining private sector focus on financing and on the delivery of development goals with extensive work on policy reform in the areas of green energy, diversification of economies, and improving the investment climate. That's really, as usual, very ambitious, but EBRD capable to do that. Based on your experiences, Veronica, where do you see the critical challenges in policy framework and enabling condition for mobilizing more investments in the region, given these huge commitments you're doing from your resources? Veronica, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. A tremendous amount of work has already been done in the region to unlock the potential of renewable energy. EBRD is very proud to have supported Kazakhstan in setting up the framework and financing its renewable energy projects. We are also supporting the renewable sector in Uzbekistan, where since 2019, almost 1 gigawatt of solar projects has already been auctioned, and more is coming up. We are actively working to support the launch of the first wind auctions in Uzbekistan. Achievements to date include $780 million investments into 20 renewable energy projects in Central Asia, with a total renewable energy capacity of above 1 gigawatt. We work across the region and have invested in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, as well as in Mongolia. Many challenges lie in the need for rapid development, sometimes from scratch, of the regulatory framework for renewables in many Central Asian countries. Through our experience across numerous countries of operations, we have accumulated a lot of institutional knowledge and lessons learned on this, and we are extensively supporting our Central Asian clients in setting up the required ecosystems and legislation. Our assistance focuses on the critical areas, such as support with developing new regulatory framework and legislation, support with development of low carbon pathways, fostering development of renewables, capacity building assistance on the market structure, tariff reforms, corporate governance in the public sector. We also assist with setting up renewable energy auctions. We are as well supporting the power sector with what is important, strengthening resilience to climate change. We find it important to assist with developing implementation capacity on the public sector side. We have been extensively involved in capacity building activities across the board, from facilitating the experience sharing among the Central Asian countries and more internationally, to supporting the involvement with international experts and consultants to support public sector clients and authorities in policy making, deal structuring, and procurement matters. We particularly support peer-to-peer exchange between the regulators of Central Asia and the European regulators. Thank you. Ahmed, you are on mute.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes. What I'm saying is that thank you, Veronica, and I will come back to you to basically to take a deep dive with you on more details about how you're doing all of these huge activities on technical assistance, facilitating your investment with this massive investment. I will come back to you that on the second round of questions. Now let me move to my sincere brother, my friend, Mohammed from Islamic Development Bank. Mohammed, Islamic Development Bank, you are the major South-to-South cooperation bank. That's one of your slogan. And ISDB is co-financed a major South Asia, Central Asia power interconnection project that's known as CASA 1000, which aims to create a regional power grid linking Central Asia to South Asia. From your experience across all these sectors and massive experience on dealing and sourcing projects, which opportunities do you see in the energy sector interconnections and regional integration in order to benefit South Asia countries? Mohammed, floor is yours.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Of course, as an MDB and, the Islamic Development Bank is South-South institution, and we build a lot on the cooperation and the regional integration. At the same time, we realized that, our strength as an MDB is working together with other colleagues and other MDBs and DFIs. And hence, in Central Asia, we really feel lucky that the platform of CARIC exists, because it's really provided a great platform for coordination and cooperation and among all MDBs and DFIs in the region. The CARIC energy strategy, the 2030, it's really have served very well as a good snapshot and roadmap for the way forward for all of us to work together in this region. And really the first pillar over there is about having a better energy security through regional integration. So as we are working there, we're not working there alone. We're working with all the colleagues from all the MDBs, whether we are doing it through sovereign lending or through PPP model or through the purely private sector model that we work on it there. But maybe from a technical point of view, we are seeing, a transition there. Historically, we used to build on the complementarity between the countries which are fossil fuel rich and the countries where hydro rich, and playing the complementarity between summer and winter, and we've seen that working over the years. And now we're seeing a new complementarity coming in between solar and wind, where there are countries where there is high radiation potential, and there are other countries where there is higher wind potential, and that also another complementarity we work in there. So the connectivity is there not only among the region and Central Asia, like you mentioned, the complementarity between Central Asia and South Asia through the CASA 1000 project. There are other projects also in a place like TAP project between Turkmenistan and Pakistan, Afghanistan. And of course, we are trying for many years to restore the CAPS, the Central Asia power system, which is many part of it had been restored. And we're glad to see that cooperation to achieve efficiency in the system. So that's in a nutshell. I mean, there's no specific opportunities. There's so many opportunities that we're trying to build there. Again, for the longer distance through DC lines or shorter border across distance through AC lines. But really the potential is there, even as we transition to more renewable energy-based economies in these countries. So back to you, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you, Brother Engineer Mohammed. Thank you very much. That's very comprehensive. And I will come back to you to see how can you put all these complementarities, not only on project, but in all aspects for developing clean energy within the portfolio of the bank, and to see what's the strategy of the bank. I will come back to you onto this. I also see that Mr. Suhail Hassin is trying to join, but I think there is some connectivity issues here. Let's see if I hope that if he can join. But now I wanted to move to Walid. Walid, as we are all aware, one of the unique strengths and competitive advantage of IFC is the ability to leverage strong and large private sector financing. You are the massive player in private sector financing globally as part of World Bank Group. How do you see the interest from domestics and international private sector in renewable energy and their appetite to provide more support with your leverage finance in Central Asia region? Walid, floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Ahmed. No, I mean, in short, there's really been significant interest from the private sector in renewable energy projects to date in Central Asia, in particular in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Taking a step back, I think in general, over the last few years, there's been a very strong interest to invest in clean energy assets. And given that within the wider region, there aren't a lot of markets that have a large renewable energy pipeline, this puts Central Asia in a lot of focus as well. And what I'll do is I'll split this between private sector financing on the investment side, on the equity side, and then talk a bit also about the financing community, the DFIs. Now, with respect to equity investors, there are a couple of factors that are key to why they would invest, right? One, of course, is the scale of the opportunity. Now, for smaller markets where investors see maybe a maximum of a few hundred megawatts of renewable energy projects, it's less of interest. But what's really important is size and scalability, which is why we're seeing a lot of interest now in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan in particular. And second is the bankability and stability of the overall regulations and regime. For example, as everybody is aware, Uzbekistan has been quite a success story as they've undertaken an ambitious reform agenda. And they've kept in mind what is needed to attract private sector investment and financing. For example, they adopted the Scaling Solar Framework, which resulted in increased participation from international investors and record low tariffs as well. On the other hand, Kazakhstan has also been steadily improving the regulatory framework, where we've been seeing an increasing interest from the investment community. With respect to the lending side, given that, and as discussed earlier in this webinar, the DFI community has been reducing focus on sort of carbon intensive technologies and gravitating more and more towards renewable energy projects, which is why there is quite a bit of liquidity also from lenders in Central Asia to finance such projects. Overall, from IFC side, we do see a lot of strong interest from both the investor and lending side for renewable energy projects in Central Asia. And then we do see quite a bit of activity in the coming years. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walid. It's always very interesting to hear from you and from IFC about more experiences. And in the second round, I will come back to you to pick some of the cases like Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan that you mentioned briefly. Now I can see that our colleague, Mr. Sohail Hassin from Asian Development Bank, joining. Welcome, Sohail. Sohail is a firm believer that the solution to climate change lies in new technology and has applied new technology to huge Asian Development Bank projects in which he acted as an energy specialist for more than 2 decades in Afghanistan, Cambodia, China, Indonesia, India, Malaysia, Mongolia, all other countries of Asian countries. So he has a massive experience. He's a principal specialist in energy within Central and West Asia Department of Asian Development Bank. With an academic background in engineering, business, and entrepreneurship, Mr. Hassin, before joining EDB, he worked in the wholesale electricity market design, pricing, regulation, energy efficiency, and demand management at the State Power Utility and Independent Regulator of Melbourne in Australia. Welcome, Sohail. So let me go directly, Sohail, to one of the major important points that we would like to learn from your expertise on it. And that's basically that we all know that EDB has an energy strategy for the Central Asia Regional Economic Corporation, which we call it CAREC. It's a program that aims to achieve a reliable, sustainable, resilient, and reformed energy markets by 2030. In addition, we also know that EDB also recently shared energy policy draft. From your massive experience on these more than 2 decades of transactions across all Asian countries, what are the key driving principles for energy transition do you see in South Asia region on the basis of EDB energy policy for 2030 and also CAREC energy strategy for 2030? Sohail, floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Sorry, it's the middle of the night somewhere in the US for me.
No worries.
Thank you for the question. Basically, what's happening, I'll start with the CAREC. The things have changed dramatically in the last few years. Now we see our CAREC member countries taking more and more interest into transition from fossil fuels, how to diversify their economy, something that even 5-6 years ago we could not discuss because that level of engagement was not simply there, right? Recently, with after the signing of the Paris Agreement, now those NDC commitments with all of our member countries that have made, the attitude towards climate change has changed. And then we have recently, as you correctly said, prepared this energy policy, which focuses on how to bring in new technology, how do we transition from the current state to the future. And at the same time, ADB is also looking at our energy policy, that the energy policies of yesterday, our evaluation department made an assessment that's not relevant to where ADB wants to go with this strategy 2030. So those changes that we see, the main thing that are driving is in future, we will see more and more investments coming towards maybe the drivers of changes are basically energy efficiency. We expect to see more implementation of incentives and policies towards energy efficiency. And how do we transform the conventional energy supply and bring in more renewable energy? And how do we integrate? We are talking about battery storage. We are talking about the overall integration of renewable energy in the grid. And we are also looking at the transition towards electrification of transport. That's going to be quite a large topic. And then we are looking at space cooling and heating. All those things are going to be more and more into our investment portfolio. And plus something that's very close to my heart as well, the distributed renewable energy. How do we bring into, though these are the things that were not there in specifically in our previous energy policies, but now going forward, we will see more and more investment on this one. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suhail. I have just been requested that I need to close in 10 minutes. Well, in addition that there are basically a lot of close friends and brothers here, like specifically Muhammad and Veronica. It's my blood in EBRD, but actually, I would like to come up with one generic, and also I have to say that I enjoyed very much what Damir mentioned and Walid as well. And I wanted to hear more, but sorry, it's about time, so I don't want to keep you after 2 because I believe also you have your time schedules busy. So I will have one, and I will follow up with you by emails on this interesting discussion, but I have one generic question that I would like to ask you all, and I would like to have the answer within 1 minute, no more, or maybe maximum 90 seconds to have your view all on this. Let's start this time with, as we say, ladies first, and then I will start after this from Damir. Veronica, how do you see regional transition and associated financing evolve between now and 2030?
That's a very interesting question. So regional transition, you would like to hear how would regional transition will evolve out. I think it will be in the first place affected by the targets that many countries set, and now I think we have heard today that many countries have put the objectives at least by 2030, as was the case, for instance, in Uzbekistan, or by 2050 and 2060, also the case of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan for sectors, for wider economy. Also, there are NDC targets. I think right now there are also quite many projects already in the making in support of these targets. So there is quite a pipeline of renewable energy projects that is in the making. And also Dr. Mohammed was introducing CASA 1000. We are very pleased to be supporting it as well. So there are also this important regional integration projects which do change the shape of international cross-border regional trade. So I think that the expectation is that by 2030, some of the countries in Central Asia that currently have fossil fuel dominated power sectors will see quite an increased share of renewable energy. This is what we see happening right now. Also, expectation is that by 2030, there will be substantial investments made into the grid, because at some point, strengthening the grid becomes particularly important for increasing the penetration of renewables. And I think that probably we will see the change in the regional flows. So there will be new exporters because of the new investments made, for instance, in renewable energy, and because of this quite a number of regional interconnections, the Central Asia connection, and also CASA 1000 and some of the other projects.
Thank you, Veronica, very much. Again, we'll follow up with you by email. Damir, representing one of the countries, what enabling condition is the private sector in the Asian countries is looking in terms of viable business case to accelerate deployment of renewable energy? In 90 seconds, please. Damir, floor is yours.
Да, спасибо большое за предоставленное слово. Смотрите, сегодня уже ведется планомерная работа по адаптации национальной регуляторной политики к новым вызовам в рамках вот этого энергетического перехода. И так уже в Казахстане в сектор зеленой энергетики в качестве инвесторов пришли крупные нефтегазовые компании, такие как Эни, имеется у них уже ряд проектов, они ввели одну электростанцию уже, это ветровая электростанция 48 мегаватт. У Тоталя есть свои проекты развития, крупные проекты развития возобновляемых источников. То есть в настоящее время компании формируют пакет предложений, в том числе вопросы размещения данных объектов, с учетом технических возможностей. Что можно сказать? Нефтегазовый сектор намерен и будет развивать проекты ВИА здесь у нас в стране. В целом же, если коротко, что я хотел сказать, мы говорим о том, что нужен системный подход при разработке вот отраслевых документов, о которых и ранее на конференции коллеги мы говорили с государственного органа. То есть разработка отраслевых документов, которые должны соответствовать переходу на низкоуглеродное развитие. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Damir. I like your pragmatic approach. Let me move to my sincere brother and my dear friend, Mohammed. You talked about complementarity. From your standpoint, how do you see the regional energy transition and associated financing evolve between now and 2030 following your complementarity approach that the bank is taking? In 90 seconds, please, Mohammed.
In a nutshell, probably is going to be driven by the private sector. With the reduction in the cost, now it's very profitable, and probably the private sector will drive it. It's not the sovereign lending that will drive it. And in addition to that, there will be a value chain approach. It's no longer just purchasing solution and put it in countries. It has to address the local manufacturing, the local job creation that comes with it, and that will be an integral part of any future strategy in the region. That's in a nutshell how I see it coming. Back to you.
Absolutely agree with you. We continue our cooperation between us together with Irina, as we always do. Now let me move to Walid. Walid, from your standpoint as IFC, the major player in private sector, what enabling condition in private sector in Central Asia in terms of viable business model and viable cases that you see IFC is pushing or trying to evolve in a pragmatic way? And in 90 seconds, please.
Sure. I think the key really to increase private sector participation is stable regulations, and consistent regulations. And as we've seen in many countries where things have, initially there's been a lot of interest, but then governments have tried to scale back down on, some of the incentives they've provided. It's led to problems. And so that would be the key one. And aside from that, in general, as was mentioned before, it's very important to have proper tariff reform in these countries. Very reduced tariffs inhibits incentives for the governments as well to increase private sector participation. I'll stop there.
I agree with you, Walid. I agree. And yeah, again, also we continue with you after the discussion here. Finally, with Suhail. Suhail, how do you see the favorite business condition and the factors in order to increase the renewable energy by 2030, and what are the favorite business models you see from ADB? Again, within 90 seconds, please. Suhail, floor is yours. Thank you.
We are trying to work with our clients and more closely to bring in new technology in the region. So we see more electric vehicle related projects coming up. We see more active engagement on the renewable energy side as well, and battery and storage. So if you take at the large countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and our client in Turkmenistan, we see a huge investment going to solar, and how do we not only just putting a solar, also integrate solar with their existing fossil fuel. So that will happen. Maybe smaller client, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they can look at technology, maybe seasonal energy storage in hydrogen. So we are going to look all of those things. But the risk we see is government not moving quickly enough to remove some of those subsidies and rethinking their energy sector, because that's the world is changing very, very fast. Otherwise, they will be sitting with a lot of stranded assets. That's our worry. Thank you very much.
That's a big topic that you're talking about government support, but I'm sure we will do it there hand in hand. I will come back to you all together through CIP, together with our colleagues from CEP. I think I need to close now. I'm sorry, it's beyond my control. It's because some kind of subsequent and consequent delays. But thank you all, and we'll keep continuing. I assure you that with our colleagues from CEP. I thank you very much, starting with Veronica, Mohammed, Walid, Suhail, and Damir. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And now over to my colleague Brasul. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ahmed, and thanks also to our distinguished panelists for this very insightful discussions on the key challenges and opportunities for mobilizing financing at scale in the Central Asia region. I think the key takeaway is not just the scale of this financing challenge, but also the level of financial innovation that the region, the countries, and all our partners are deploying, trying to convert this challenge into an opportunity for energy transition. So it's very, very interesting and insightful discussions. I know we are enjoying the discussions today, and as we can see, the chat box has also been very active. But we are approaching the end of the meeting. In fact, we have crossed a few minutes. And to formally close this webinar, I would now like to invite Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General of IRENA, to please deliver the closing remarks. DDG, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Prasoon. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, let me first start by thanking on behalf of IRENA and our co-organizing partners, the UK COP26 presidency and the UNFCCC Secretariat. A sincere thanks and gratitude for everyone who were able to participate today and for their contributions in these deliberations. The event saw a very strong presence of government agencies, national stakeholders, private sector, and development partners, and with a very active engagement of the Central Asia region. And the kind of insights that we heard, I think they're extremely valuable. We really hope that this meeting will help in setting the Central Asia region on course to realize its very significant renewable energy potential, which really can be a catalyst for long-term sustainable development, as well as it'll open up new finance opportunities to accomplish targets and commitments that all these countries have really included in their NDCs. we recently released the statistics handbook from IRENA. And what we see is the total installed capacity of renewable energy in the region is just over 16 gigawatts, out of which hydropower alone accounts for 13.6. So it's pretty much the dominant renewable energy. So there is clearly a huge untapped potential, which is also something that a lot of our participants highlighted today. For example, our colleague from the Ministry of Energy of Kyrgyzstan mentioned that at present, only less than 1% of the renewable energy potential has been utilized by the country, and more or less limited to small hydro. We also heard that in the revised NDCs, Kyrgyzstan aims to reduce their emissions by 2030 through increasing their capacity of the current hydro plants, and also building many more new small hydro plants, also using geothermal energy and solar thermal collectors. We are also aware that Kazakhstan is drafting a national strategy for low carbon economic development until 2050, which will provide a very clear vision of the transformation that they want to see in their economy and society towards a low carbon future. And I was really pleased to hear today that Kazakhstan is well on its way to create their strategy for reaching carbon neutrality by 2060 as a part of their strengthened and enhanced national climate plan. Based on the discussions today, we can clearly see that developing a long-term national vision is an important step. But the necessary investments for energy transition and achieving net zero emissions will clearly depend on adopting appropriate regulatory and market frameworks. Hence, we think it's very critical at the national level. The Central Asia member states could focus on improving the investment climate in their domestic renewable energy markets. And while we all know that renewables are already the least cost option, they also need a level playing field vis-a-vis fossil fuels, which requires an open, stable, and transparent regulatory framework, as well as enabling conditions. Finally, some countries may need further support to enhance the role of renewable energy in NDCs and their and LTS and associated implementation plans. And here, development agencies, multilateral banks can play a very critical role. IRENA's climate investment platform and the planned investment forums we think will facilitate a higher level of investment in renewable energy and create that kind of finance and investment climate that is needed to further bolster investments in renewables. So with this, I'd like to thank you again for participating and offering us very useful insights and inputs during this workshop. We would like to extend a special thanks to our partners, the UK COP26 presidency and the UNFCCC. In particular, the COP26 regional ambassador for Europe, Central Asia, Turkey, and Iran, Mr. Moran, and the UNFCCC Director of Mitigation Division, Mr. James Grohart, and their teams for their very active engagement and support for this event. Special thanks also to the UNDP, which is a key partner under the Climate Promise initiative. And let me also thank our moderators and our panelists for their very, very solid contribution and insights that have enriched our discussions today. We look forward working side by side with Central Asia and all the partners to achieve national energy, climate and development objectives for a climate neutral and climate resilient future, as well as for a green recovery. So thank you so much.
Thank you, DDG, for your closing remarks and also for reinforcing some of the key messages that we heard today from our distinguished speakers. Well, this brings us to a close, and we are hopeful that this webinar achieved its intended purpose as a platform for discussion and knowledge sharing on this very important topic. We look forward to our continued cooperation in Central Asia and beyond. Thank you and goodbye.